Okay, our next speaker is Kelsey Reinhardt. She is the president and CEO of CatholicVote. After a decade of discernment with the Dominican Sisters of St. Cecilia, Kelsey held senior roles at EWTN News and served as the interim executive director of Catholic News Agency. She joined CatholicVote as head of media and evangelization in 2024 and then was appointed the president and CEO in 2025. Bringing with her the background of integrating deep theological insight, global advocacy, and mission-driven media leadership. She also chairs the board of Fierce Athlete. I would ask you to go look that up, all initial caps, Fierce Athlete, created to empower female athletes to thrive in their God-given identity and femininity. And just a few months ago, welcomed a baby boy back in the back, our biggest star for today. So if you would, welcome Kelsey.
Well, it's a delight to be with you all here today. So many friendly faces in the room. I see the Dominican sisters, who were my family for so long, John Sherman, who I worked with, President Menace and others, and of course, the little guy in the back. So if he makes noises while his mom is speaking, you'll have to forgive him. He's just taking in all the conference. So, all right, well, I would love to just begin with what CatholicVote was involved in a couple of weeks ago, the Washington Nationals dispute. So if you were here in the city, you understood that there was a disturbing display of contempt towards Catholics and faithful Christians in the recordings released about Trevor Williams. And we demanded accountability, and the Nationals ultimately did the right thing. That was a victory worth noting and worth savoring for exactly 1 minute. And I say that because CatholicVote's battle in the political sphere parallels the battle that you are facing in higher education. What we're seeing in terms of the anti-Catholic bias in society exists in many places. And today, we learned that it was not simply about one man in the front office of the Washington Nationals. We warned that the bigotry behind this episode was not an anomaly. He was described in one memorable phrase as every other community relations director in sports. Major League Baseball is no longer merely dealing with one rogue staffer at one franchise. Today, they warned 3 Christian players that they would be fined $10,000 for their stance against Pride Night. The league is now the face of anti-Christian bias. I would go further. The anonymous staffer at the Major League Baseball that made that decision is every other decision maker across government, entertainment, media, and the arts. And when we look at just how far removed these individuals are from the belief and convictions of ordinary Americans, from the people who fill the pews, coach the little leagues, and pay the taxes, one question presses itself upon us with an uncomfortable force. Where do these people come from? We know the answer. They are being produced deliberately, systematically, in an uninterrupted stream by the institutions of higher education that have come to dominate the commanding heights of our culture. Now, that observation is not a counsel of despair, especially for this room, fighting against it. But to respond to it wisely, we have to reckon honestly with where we are, and perhaps more importantly, how we got there. America's great universities were not always engines of post-Christian formation. They were at their founding something closer to the opposite. The oldest and most prestigious universities in this country arose from a culture that regarded education and moral formation as inseparable, indeed, as aspects of a single task. Harvard, whose earliest motto was Veritas Christo et Ecclesia, for Christ and his church, stands as the most obvious example. Yale, Princeton, Brown, And all the other original Ivy League institutions were founded, at least in significant part, to train clergy and form Christian leaders. Duke, though not Ivy League, grew from a distinctly Christian educational mission. The assumption embedded in their founding was not merely that religious formation was compatible with rigorous education. It was that education was incomplete and ultimately incoherent without it. And think back, the Jesuits in the founding of America were relentless. Georgetown in 1789, Loyola Maryland in 1852, Loyola Chicago in 1870, Loyola New Orleans in 1912, 27 institutions of higher learning in the United States alone. A network that was built not from government mandate or philanthropic fashion, but by the conviction that forming the whole person toward truth and virtue were among the most important things that a civilization could undertake. The question before us tonight is, what cause do those institutions serve today? You are a deeply educated audience. I will not insult your intelligence with a lecture on the trajectory of Catholic higher education. You know the story. You know the Land O'Lakes Statement of 1967 and my alma mater, Notre Dame's involvement in it, which drove a wedge between Catholic universities and their ecclesial identity in the name of academic freedom. And you have watched those consequences unfold in the decades that followed. The present condition of Catholic higher education, with a growing number of honorable exceptions in this room, is not an accident. It is the logical outcome of choices made and choices deliberately kept. And here's what I want to offer as a genuinely hopeful observation, not in spite of a crisis, but because of it. The crisis is breaking open, and it is breaking open because of artificial intelligence. If we are alert and courageous, we are uniquely positioned to seize an answer. And what do I mean when I say that the arrival of artificial intelligence is breaking open this crisis? Armarda Shehu, Vice President and Chief AI Officer at George Mason University, recently put the matter with unusual candor. Quote, "The reckoning has arrived at the public university now. The students who arrived in good faith for a credential the institution sold them are owed an answer, and the answer cannot be that the institution is studying the question. The institution has to choose in public what it is for. The hedging is over. Said more plainly, the jig is up. What comes next is a redesign or a slow surrender, and the slow surrender will be paid for by the students who can least afford it," end quote. The jig is up. That is exactly right. But I want to be precise about what kind of reckoning this is. If universities respond to AI merely by shifting from job training to resilience training, they will have missed the deepest point. Because the crisis is not economic. The crisis, as elucidated by Pope Leo XIV, is anthropological. The question is not simply, what will students need to know in an age of intelligent machines? The deeper question, as I can attest after 9 years of teaching at Catholic schools, is this: what kind of human beings must we form in an age when machines can imitate intelligence, produce language, simulate creativity, and displace entire categories of work? To answer that question honestly, you must begin somewhere. You must have a prior commitment, a settled account of what a human being is, what he is for, and what it means for him to flourish. And precisely on that prior commitment, the secular university, as well as public schools, have, by deliberate design and self-construction, declared themselves neutral. But we know that there is no such thing as neutral. Neutrality on the nature of the human person is itself a position. And it is a position that Catholic education, at its best, has never accepted and never can accept. And this is precisely why Catholic education is ready for this Catholic moment. If you'll indulge me for a moment off script, the president of Catholic University just spoke about Gaudium et Spes 22. It is Jesus Christ who fully reveals man to himself. In an age where the questions of man are pressing in upon what it means for every student to experience education, this room, these universities are going to be the ones who have the answers. And this is precisely why Cardinal Newman Society is doing only what I could describe as Herculean work. It was founded in 1993 to promote and defend Catholic education, and the schools in this room are genuinely living up to the name. That mission is one of the most consequential undertakings in America today, and its importance in the age of AI is only growing. In the midst of an accelerating collapse of formal education, and I mean public schools, but also nominally Catholic schools and universities, the Cardinal Newman Society is insisting on something that most of these institutions have forgotten or are too embarrassed to say aloud. Education is not the transfer of information or the acquisition of credentials or the cultivation of adaptable skills, which is how higher education gets sold to so many. If those things were all that education was, artificial intelligence will deliver them faster, more efficiently, and at a fraction of the cost. The question of what education is for has been forced upon us, whether we are ready to answer it or not. Education is the formation of the whole person towards truth, virtue, and although he mentioned humility, I would say especially prudence, the charioteer of the virtues, solidarity, wisdom, and rightly ordered freedom. And I might add, to form saints. We just had our big America 250 event in La Crosse, Wisconsin with the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe last week. And I had a very, America 250 speech all ready to go. I was just mulling over the opening. And it just wasn't hitting right. So I went to adoration, confession, fell asleep that night, and I wake up in dreamland. And who is there? I kid you not. I am no mystic, but John Paul II. And I seize the opportunity and I say, Pope John Paul II, I need help with my mission and with my talk. And he looks at me in that John Paul II way and he says, what is your mission? You know how you say things in dreamland that you don't know where it comes from, the answer is kind of given to you? And I say immediately without flinching, to be a saint. And he smiles, and then he turned into John Paul I. So definitely a dream. I am no mystic. I don't know what I ate. But I think that John Paul II is absolutely right. The call to be saints, what is Catholic education for? When you talk to students, when you bring this up, they think that saints are stained glass windows. They think that saints are predestined beings. They think that saints are, lack the beating heart of humanity, almost like when little James was born, the doctor's there and he's like, it's a boy, it's a girl, it's a saint. Congratulations. And it comes with a little holy habit. The students think this way, right? And I think in this room, we are familiar with the myth of inevitable progress. I think Catholics oftentimes have in their mind the myth of inevitable decline. Something has gone wrong in society and we can't fix it. If you look at America across 250 years, if you look at every saint that has come from Catherine Drexel, starting the order for Native Americans and blacks, if you look at Damian Molokai addressing what's happening in the leper colonies, if you look at Mother Frances Cabrini helping the orphans, if you look at Father Augustus Tolton starting a ministry of reconciliation, if you look at Father Francis Silo serving the immigrants in Louisiana, if you look at all the Jesuits, Isaac Jogues and Father Joliet riding down the Mississippi, what did they do? What did they do as American saints? They were so conformed to Christ that they stopped the inevitable decline. Despair has no calculus for change. Grace does. Anything at any moment can become better if it's conformed to Jesus Christ and his cross. This is the call of Catholic higher education in this moment. What will happen to the rest of education with AI? I saw it in the Catholic schools. Already, when Turnitin.com had to be used in the classrooms because of plagiarism, we knew that technology was forcing a question upon us. And guess what happened? It became so easy to cheat. You could find every answer to every textbook on Google. One person in the class, all they had to do was take a picture of the answers in the back of that textbook that they found online, text it to every member of the class, and the assignment is done. In the age of AI, I am telling you, education will collapse. The crisis is upon us, and it can only be answered by a school and a system that has an anthropological answer. We form people. We put them in a room. We discuss together. We journey toward truth. We make it exciting to love learning. The goal of a Catholic education, to form those saints, to be the saints for the next 250 years. Now I'll say this, just returning to my script because I went a little off there. It's often said that Catholics are so far behind the times that they're actually ahead. I think the best of our schools have returned to an education that an 80-year-old would remember from Catholic grammar school. Penmanship, use of memory, articulated speech, critical and creative thinking, Socratic discussion, passion for truth. And let's not forget manners and elegant dressing as the sort of Jane Austen entree into character. They are being nurtured by a passion for civics and genuine patriotism. These schools are positioned to flourish in the era of artificial intelligence precisely because they are offering what no machine can replicate: the formation of human beings who know who they are and why they are here. This matters not only for Catholic education, it matters enormously for the next 250 years of America. The American experiment is unique in the history of nations because it depends not merely on wise words inscribed in founding documents, but on the moral and religious character of citizens entrusted with reading, interpreting, and applying them. As George Washington well knew when he counseled after leaving office, religion and morality were the two indispensable supports of our republic. Or as John Adams would say, writing to the Massachusetts militia in 1798, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Even Thomas Jefferson, who systematically removed entire portions of the Bible, was unwilling to leave that sacred text behind. The Constitution, however brilliant, cannot save a people determined to corrupt it. Laws cannot preserve liberty when citizens no longer possess the virtues that self-government requires. The founders understood this. They said so repeatedly and with great clarity. We have spent the better part of 2.5 centuries finding out what happens when we forget it. Brian Birch, the ambassador to the Vatican now, previous predecessor at CatholicVote, speaking recently to the graduating class at Thomas Aquinas College, made this point with great precision. He said, "The deepest divide in our country is not Republican versus Democrat, red state versus blue state, or left versus right. The deepest divide is between those who believe in God and his power and those who deny him, or increasingly, those who resent him. A society that loses God does not become neutral. It becomes vulnerable to idols, and the worst of them. There is a phrase widely attributed to Chesterton, and while the precise wording may not appear in published works, it faithfully captures his settled conviction. When men choose not to believe in God, they do not thereafter believe in nothing. They then become capable of believing in anything. In his 1924 Father Brown story titled The Miracle of Moon Crescent, Chesterton describes a group of modern skeptics, rationalists, and materialists who are shaken by a crime that seems to involve black magic of some sort of preternatural force. Father Brown, however, cuts through the hysteria and shows that the apparent miracle has an ordinary human explanation. The Chestertonian point is extremely valid and very much in sync with the Cardinal Newman Society's perspective. People who loudly reject religion are not rational. They may actually become vulnerable to superstition, panic, fashionable nonsense, or occult explanations because they have lost a stable framework for reality. On the other hand, Father Brown's Catholicism is the source of his mental clarity and the spiritual freedom that makes possible a genuinely rational approach. The people being shaped in our elite institutions today are not being formed toward greater freedom or deeper rationality. They are being formed toward ideological rigidity and moral confusion. And so we come to the Catholic moment. That phrase was coined by the late Father Richard John Newhouse, one of the earliest advocates of this group, who argued that now is the time for faithful Catholics to bring their full intellectual, moral, and cultural inheritance to bear on America's future. Not as a bid for dominance, not as a sectarian retreat into a protected enclave while the culture burns, tempting though it is, but as an offering, a vision of the human person that this country desperately needs and that we are uniquely positioned to provide. There's a reason that the hottest club in New York is the Catholic Church for Gen Z. The Catholic Moment for America is offering this vision, the human person created by God, wounded by sin, redeemed by Christ, called to virtue, ordered to communion, and destined for eternal life. This is the truth about man upon which the entire edifice of the Western civilization was built. Dear friends, you understand something that many others have missed, that one of the most urgent civic acts that we can perform is to restore education to its proper purpose. If we want to heal the fractures tearing at our common life, if we want to rebuild a culture capable of sustaining free and virtuous self-government, we must recover the fullness of the Catholic intellectual tradition. That is why your presence here matters, and why your decision to recover what education is for is more urgent than any moment in recent memory. The task before you is not to preserve Catholic schools and colleges as safe enclaves in a hostile culture. The genuinely historic task is to form men and women who can walk back into the commanding heights of our society, into positions at the Washington Nationals and the MLB, leading corporations and centers of knowledge, not merely as culture warriors in the reactive sense, but as saints, as bearers of truth, conformed to Christ, people who know what a human being is, what education is for, and what a civilization worth inhabiting actually looks like. That is what the Catholic Moment means as we celebrate America 250, looking ahead to the next 250 years. That is the challenge God in history has placed before you and before us. Go forward bravely.